CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie O.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Nigeria criticises Britain for putting it on the travel red list, branding the move travel apartheid as countries tighten COVID entry restrictions.
Our other headlines: protests over prices. In Belgium, thousands of people take to the streets angry at stagnant wages and rising inflation.
China's leaders put stability over speed as they chart a course for the country's economic future.
And the American congressman under fire for his Christmas card as the country comes to terms with another school shooting.
Nigeria is accusing the UK of imposing travel apartheid after Britain placed the country on its red travel list amid concerns over the Omicron COVID variant.
Governments across Europe are increasing restrictions to try to curb this new wave of the virus. French President Macron has been meeting cabinet ministers to assess the threat presented by the variant.
In a moment, our correspondent Ross Cullen is in Paris. First, Naweed Jabarkil is here in London. So, Naweed, the UK's travel curbs have come in for some serious criticism, haven't they?
Yeah, that's right. Lots of criticism from different sectors. First, the travel industry, the Business Travel Association, saying it was a hammer blow to the sector. That's because just when things were starting to look better for airlines, for airports, for those in the travel and tourism industry, these curbs are likely to put pressure on people in terms of how they book their travel. The cost of travel will go up because of one of the main changes coming into effect on Tuesday. That's the return of pre-departure lateral flow and PCR tests for anyone aged 12 and above. Today, another change that's come into effect is Nigeria. The African country has been added to the UK's red list. In total, it means 11 countries are now on the UK government's red list. That means anyone coming here, only UK and Irish nationals allowed to travel, and they must go into a 10-day hotel quarantine at a cost of almost $3,000. Nigeria's High Commissioner here in the UK, speaking to the BBC earlier, he said that the travel ban was, quote, apartheid. The reason he thinks that is because he says the COVID-19 pandemic is just that. It's a global pandemic and not a, quote, endemic, just affecting Nigeria or these other African countries. We've had the UK government respond to that. Kit Malthouse, a minister here, said that the choice of word was unfortunate. Obviously, important connotations linked to apartheid in this country's role in Africa previously. But in terms of where the ban goes from here, no indication that officials are looking to change this anytime soon. Health Secretary Sajid Javid said that the travel restrictions brought in are temporary, that they're necessary, and really what they're trying to do is stop any more importation of cases of the new Omicron variant from coming into the United Kingdom.
And Naweed, Omicron cases numbers rising over the weekend, warnings that things could get worse.
Yeah, that's right. We've just had the latest figures for the UK in the last few minutes. 90 new cases of Omicron recorded, taking the country's total up to 336. The epicenter still England in terms of the breakdown of the United Kingdom. 64 new infections in England, another 23 in Scotland and 3 in Wales as well. Now, Health Secretary Sajid Javid, he's set to update Parliament today as well, an urgent update to Parliament, because what appears to be the government's thinking now is that there could be community transmission of this. So it's no longer just something that's been brought in from abroad, but that it could be spreading here in the UK. As mentioned, almost 336 cases. Now, officials do expect that figure to rise. Scientists say that within the next few weeks, one scientist advising the government said that it could become the dominant strain overtaking the Delta variant, which has already been recorded all across the world and wreaked havoc in several countries across the world. But just in terms of those travel changes, there is also advice from some government scientists. One of them, Professor Mark Woolhouse, saying that this was really not the right thing to be doing. He said that it was too late for these travel restrictions to have any impact because, as mentioned, there are already cases cases in the UK. The real figure, aside from those that are being recorded, could be up to 4 times higher. And he said that trying to bring in these restrictions now could be like trying to close the barn door after the horse has bolted.
Norwegia Barkill with the latest from London. Thank you.
Well, that's the story in the UK. Let's take you to France next and talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen in Paris. Ross, Macron meeting his cabinet. Any new coronavirus restrictions announced?
Yeah, Jamie, they're going to tighten the health protocols when it comes to schools, moving to alert level 3, where alert level 4 is the highest. What it means is that there's going to be restrictions on some outdoor activities. Also, masks will be compulsory for all pupils, indoors and outdoors. Face coverings have always been compulsory for teachers throughout this academic year. But apart from that, holding fire at the moment. No new national lockdown, no new national curfew, no new restrictions on bars and restaurants, and the school holidays are not going to be brought forward for now. We do already have here in France pretty tight coronavirus protocols. You have to show your health pass if you want to go into a cafe or a cinema. Masks have been mandatory indoors in public since last year, so no change there. One option that the government was looking at is potentially bringing back the obligation to wear your mask when you are outside in public. That's currently only in force in a couple of French cities, not a nationwide mandate. So the government at the moment really trying to push forward with its vaccination campaign, along with those already tight restrictions that we have here. They're going to open up the vaccination campaign, we do believe, to 5-year-olds. At the moment, if you're between 5 and 11, you can only get a vaccination if you do already have an underlying condition. But the government wants to widen the vaccination campaign to include young children now. We do believe that it's going to be open to those over the age of 5. But no new major restrictions for now. France holding off on following Austria into a national lockdown.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you very much.
Well, Italy has tightened curbs on people who aren't vaccinated against COVID-19. Only those who've been given jabs or recently recovered can sit inside bars and restaurants and attend cinemas and clubs. Anyone using public transport without a COVID health certificate could be fined up to $450.
One of the scientists behind the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID vaccine has called for more measures to slow the spread of the Omicron variant. Professor Sarah Gilbert says this strain could be more transmissible and vaccines less effective.
The spike protein of this variant contains mutations already known to increase transmissibility of the virus. But there are additional changes that may mean antibodies induced by the vaccines or by infection with other variants may be less effective at preventing infection with Omicron. Until we know more, we should be cautious and take steps to slow down the spread of this new variant.
Simon Clark is an associate professor in cellular microbiology at the University of Reading here in the UK. Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Simon. So there have been some reports that the Omicron cases so far seem to be mild. Is that what you're hearing, and could that be a cause for cautious optimism?
Well, yeah, I mean, if it's true, we ought to remember that all variants of COVID-19 predominantly cause mild infections. And we've known about this variant, only for about 4 weeks. So it's very early to say, given we would have started off with very low infection numbers, and we're told in younger people as well, whether or not that would work through into the older population and start putting people in intensive care. I am hearing that intensive care admissions in South Africa are going up by quite a lot. And, why is that? It seems entirely possible, likely even, that given that they're entering the summer, it is because of COVID-19. And one would therefore assume that it's down to Omicron variant. So I think we might be jumping the gun a little bit by ascribing mild symptoms to this variant.
And what's your view on these renewed travel restrictions in the UK? Do you think it's too late?
No, it's not too late. It's already here, and it should slow down the import. One of the problems previously with Delta and with the initial introduction into the country is that it happened so many times. And it's like throwing lots of pebbles into a pond. You get a big problem and your numbers take off very quickly. If the authorities can slow that down and stop much more coming into the country, I don't think they'd be completely successful, then that should just buy us more time.
You mentioned the Delta variant just there. What is the situation with that now? Is it fading away, or is it still a threat?
Oh no, it's still by far the predominant cause of COVID infections in the UK and in many countries around the world. I expect that to change over the coming months.
So with winter now upon us here in the Northern Hemisphere, how concerned are you over the spread of the virus during these colder months?
Well, the cold months mean that it's ideal conditions for transmission of respiratory tract viruses. So I'm quite concerned. It really does all come down to how much disease does Omicron cause in the vaccinated and boosted population. And we don't have a good handle on that yet.
We just heard Sarah Gilbert a bit before from the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine team. She's warning that future pandemics may be more lethal. Do you share her concerns?
Yeah, it's entirely possible. I mean, pandemics are a feature of human history, and they've been with us, well, for entire human history, really. And there's no reason to think that this is as bad as it can get. So, yes, I think she's right.
And what are your thoughts on a potential lockdown here in the UK over Christmas and beyond?
I don't think by Christmas that it'll be a problem. I think if we are going to have a problem in this country, it'll be in the new year. But like I say, it really does depend on the effect the Omicron has on people who've had 2 vaccines and a booster.
Simon Clark from the University of Reading. Many thanks indeed.
You're welcome.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a national day of strike action in Belgium. Thousands of workers take to the streets demanding wage rises and stronger union representation.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. And a quick reminder, CGTN is available to watch for free on all of the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online at Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
More than 6,000 protesters have taken to the streets across Belgium in a national strike. Demonstrators are angry over stagnant wages and say rising inflation is damaging living standards. Brian Thompson reports from Brussels.
Labour unions in Belgium are holding a national day of action over wages and diminishing trade union powers. At the peak of protesting on Monday morning, there were a couple of thousand people on the streets of Brussels. And their main message is that conditions have deteriorated after nearly 2 years of the pandemic. Workers say they've had to sacrifice a lot while facing changes in demand and all types of scheduling shifts, but their wages have really stagnated and they've seen their purchasing power diminish more and more. Basically, the common message is they've lost a lot of ground that they fought for because companies have had to cut back. The calls are echoed from both the French and Flemish sides of this country. Take a listen.
Of course, the COVID crisis is part of the problem, but even in this difficult time, we should obtain better recognition from employers, but also from the political sphere. That's not the case. This explains our outrage.
If there is no representation in the companies, there are no negotiations to improve our purchasing power. There is not a single employer opening their door to raise our salaries. That's why our presence is so important.
It's hard to find a job as a young person. There are fewer and fewer places available, and they're asking for much more experience. They're asking for much more. Finding a job is hard.
And many of these workers who are on strike are coming from Belgium's public transportation sector. Notably, that includes conductors and controllers who would normally be working on the country's different metro and bus systems. A significant disruption is expected here in the Belgian capital to the metro and bus system, but they say it will be back to normal on Tuesday. Ryan Thompson, CGTN, Brussels.
Shares in the embattled Chinese property developer Evergrande have fallen to an 11-year low after the company admitted there was no guarantee of meeting its debts. It's raised new fears that the company could default with yet another payout due of more than $80 million. Evergrande is the world's most indebted company. China's market regulators have insisted that the spillover risks of a default would be manageable.
Meanwhile, China's tech giant Alibaba said it will restructure its e-commerce business and replace its chief finance officer. The company's new plan will see its operations split into an international branch and a domestic one. Alibaba has been grappling with competition and a regulatory crackdown on big tech firms.
The European Commission is sending more than $1 billion to Ireland to help it deal with the impact of Brexit. It's the first country to receive money from a fund that was set up in the summer to help EU members after Britain's withdrawal from the EU. It'll be paid in 3 instalments over 2 years. The funding will target job creation and training.
And French carmaker Renault says it's planning to cut fewer jobs than previously announced. In September, the company said it would open talks with unions on cutting up to 2,000 jobs in engineering and support as it shifts to electric vehicles. That number has now been scaled down to around 1,700 jobs.
China's policymakers have stressed stability over speed when it comes to economic recovery from the pandemic. At a meeting in Beijing, leaders also said they want to give domestic consumption a bigger role in driving growth. David Mann is a Beijing-based investment expert. I asked him what stood out from the meeting.
Well, China's growth, GDP growth, will fall next year naturally. One of the main causes is that global exports will fall off because there is a global recovery in manufacturing and production in the markets that China's been selling into. So China's growth, which is at 7.5%, 8+% this year, it's rather an unnatural figure. So I think something will be made of this drop to probably 5% next year. But 5% over an economy of this strength and depth is actually very healthy and sustainable. So I don't think that in core economic terms, in the shift from the last quarter of this year into the first 2 quarters of next year, are anything to worry about. There are things to worry about which are outside the economy, but the basic economy is very sound.
What about this move to a concentration on the domestic economy? Is China's domestic consumption going to be enough to propel a sustainable pandemic recovery?
Well, yes, it is. I mean, China's not only had to navigate managing zero tolerance in COVID, but it's had 5 years of trade sanctions from the United States, which have barely dented the economy. So it shows how internally robust and how dependent upon domestic consumption and growth China has become. Not out of some isolationist principles, but it's an actual fact of 1.4 billion people in an economy that has become as sophisticated as the Chinese domestic economy has become. The weakness is that China depends on imports from all over the world, some of which will be seeing some inflation in the next 2 quarters particularly, and those are COVID related and supply chain related. So there'll be some impact from that. But overall, as far as things stand, unless COVID deepens in China and the restrictions become domestically greater, I think that we'll see a reasonable year next year.
What about the real estate market? Many have been watching the unravelling of developers like the property company Evergrande with concern about contagion. How do you think that sector is going to impact China's growth?
Well, I think investing in real estate companies of scale in China in the coming 2 years is probably not a good idea. The government is curtailing real estate speculation quite deliberately. The credit policies of banks lending to real estate development companies are now much tighter. Evergrande, on the other hand, is being managed. The thing about Evergrande is that most of its debt is secured by land, and that land has held its value. So maybe 70+% can be recovered by the key banks that have lent to Evergrande. So I don't see a domino theory within the real estate sector. I do see a dampening, though, of speculation. And I don't think that the management systems that are now in the banking sector are going to kill the real estate sector, as some have said. It'll be okay in general terms, but I'd rather be a lender and supplier to the real estate sector going forward, well secured, than actually involved directly in real estate companies.
Bitcoin has tumbled almost 5% at the start of the week. It follows a bruising weekend, which at one stage saw the crypto leader lose over a fifth of its value. Let's talk now to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. So, John, what's going on?
I told you not to buy it. I told you not to buy it, didn't I? Look, it's probably a blip, okay, but let me lay everything out so that you fully understand. It did indeed, it went down a very long way over the weekend, well below 50,000. And of course that is significant because at its peak, Bitcoin was up around 60,000. So you can see that's a significant decrease. So it's been a weekend of dumping all the way around the world. People have gone to the transfer station and they have dumped their Bitcoin and all the other cryptocurrencies as well. They didn't escape from this, but obviously Bitcoin is always the headliner. So you may have different numbers there, but I have that it was down about 20% on Sunday, went as low as 43,000, which is really very low indeed. Saturdays and Sundays are always a little bit thin for obvious reasons. And on Sunday then, at the end of the Sunday session, it had made up around 2%, bringing us more or less back to where we are now. And the reason for this is, of course, the Federal Reserve here, the central bank, is now making it very clear that they're going to speed up their tapering of asset buying. They've been buying $120 billion worth of bonds every month to prop up the U.S. economy. Now, they did say a couple of weeks ago, and we did it on this program, that they were intending to slow that down. But what's happening now is, originally they said they would slow it and stop it by June of next year, and now it's going to be March of next year, and that brings the likelihood of the first interest rate hike in several years in the U.S. economy forward to the first half of 2022 and not the second half of 2022, which we were all expecting. And then on top of that, over the weekend, not now, not Monday, but over the weekend, there are very real fears about Omicron, of course, and all of that certainly doesn't help. So the latest I have on my little phone here is the Bitcoin stands at 48,800 at the moment. So a cascading weekend of sell-offs going on, and it brings into question, will Bitcoin ever hit 100,000? Now, I could tell you that the bulls, people who are bullish about Bitcoin, say, yes, it will, and it still can. We spoke to somebody yesterday who is a Bitcoin bull, and he's still expecting it to be at 100,000 by the time we get to the Christmas and New Year period. But at the moment, it looks more and more difficult to get there, and that weekend just gone has certainly been a dent in the aspiration of those who wish to see it that high. But the real enthusiasts still think it will get there within a couple of weeks.
So, John, what do you think this tells us about cryptocurrencies, then?
Be very careful. I mean, seriously, you do have to be very careful. But it is not as much of the wild, wild west as it was at this time last year. And let me try and explain why. I think cryptocurrency is definitely here to stay. I mean, I was very skeptical at the beginning, And I thought it would go away potentially, particularly if regulation comes in. But I don't think that is going to happen. And here is why I don't think it's going to happen. Because technology is already building in cryptocurrency to its new devices. And a good example of that would be in banking apps, where Ripple, which is one of the cryptocurrency companies, is working on a system to do foreign transfer of money, remittances back home, to make it really, really as easy as blinking. And it's not that easy even now, but this will make it really, really super easy to move money from one account to your family back home overseas. So that is one reason why I think crypto may not be going away. Obviously, regulation is coming. It's got to come. We know that the governments around the world are not entirely happy about it. But what I do know is going on is that people like Ripple and XRP, which is another cryptocurrency, and Ethereum, which operates on the Ether blockchain base, all of these companies are, as we speak, putting in proposals to the SEC here, the leading regulator, saying, look, leading regulator, you don't know how to deal with this. We do. So instead of trying to regulate it like it's a stock, why don't you let us put our proposal forward, which we're now doing, and together all of us will help to regulate the system going forward. So they're all putting in their documents to the SEC at the moment. So regulation is coming, but it may not turn out to be as harsh as was originally thought. Finally, you do have to make the point, though, you just do, that, the value in Bitcoin is really only in the minds of those who believe in it. There's nothing really backing this stuff up in many ways. But you could also argue that that's true of a lot of things that are of value in life. And I think the fact that they're working behind the scenes amongst themselves to get the regulation right, and the fact that technology, which we've probably yet to see, many of us, on our phones and things, is already planning to incorporate cryptocurrencies, that probably tells you a lot, I think.
It certainly does. Thank you very much indeed. John Terrett in New York.
One industry that's boomed in lockdown is insurance, as more of us take steps to secure the things that are precious to us. I've been talking to the head of the new insurance startup WeFox about the impact of this pandemic on the global insurance industry.
I think insurance is something we all need. It has been a great industry. It's been around as a way to protect liabilities and ensure that we have safety in mind. And I think that will continue. So there's no fundamental change in the concept and philosophy of insurance. But as you know, technology that we use today, the information that we have in your mobile phones, for instance, or the way we are sharing our applications, there is so much more information that can give you much more precision information around the way you live, rather than doing the traditional industry, which was more demographic driven. So that the change is really about personalization.
Talk to me as a customer. This is a $5.2 trillion market. How can tech and AI help it innovate and grow? And what does this all mean for me as the consumer and the customer, and the way that I do banking and the way I buy insurance?
AI is a tool that can give you better analytics around what we do. When you're trying to buy your insurance, you don't even know who your broker is often. You don't even know what products they're using. So ability to have all that information in your fingertip, on your phone, so that you can be able to go in and out of different insurance policies and knowing exactly what the economics are is something that I believe people want, something that people should have. They're more democratizing the whole insurance industry that are mystery, other than you write a check every year and you forget about it until something happens to you. Just like today with Amazon.com, you have a much better option of what you want to buy, what choice do you have, what brand do you want, and you can switch when you're not happy with that. And I think with today, with the mobility and cloud information, we can be able to bring that sense of infrastructure, enterprise, right into your fingertips in your home.
The pandemic has forced lots of companies to accelerate innovation, and it's highlighted the need for disruptors right across industries. As a Silicon Valley entrepreneur, I wonder what you've learned from the pandemic.
I actually call this the 4 C's. And the first C is, of course, COVID-19. But there are 3 C's that has an implication to it, I believe, that are really, really critical. One of them is really around consumer, because the consumer that used to be behaving a certain way Now you can be able to work from anywhere. You can buy things from online. The whole digitalization of consumer has accelerated. And I think the other C that I talked about is China. Clearly, we are in the channel that are working with a large number of audience around the world. So it's creating a major changes in the way we work with each other. So in a world where we all depend on each other, we need a better signal to coordinate so that we can be able to manage, for instance, supply chain much better than the way we do. I think the last C would be chips. Typically requires 1,300 semiconductor parts to build a car. But if you miss one part, you cannot build a car. And this is a big issue. So we need to make sure we can all work together, understanding overall supply chain. And I think it's going to be like this for a while until we get over and coordinate better. And we really do need the global systematic thinking in how we signal each other in managing supply chain going forward.
Tourism has helped Greece's economic recovery into the third quarter. The country's GDP expanded 2.7% July through September, boosted by consumer spending and better than expected tourism, with growth in the first 9 months now hitting 9.3%. Experts are predicting the country will pass the government's original target of just under 7% for 2021. Well, that news comes as the 32nd annual Greek Economic Summit takes place in Athens. The conference is organised in partnership with the US Chamber of Commerce. Our reporter Evangelo Sipsas is watching proceedings. He joins us now from Athens. So, firstly, Evangelo, positive signs for Greece's economy.
Yeah, well, the Greek economy is doing much better than it was from last year, and that the numbers show exactly that. Tourism industry this year in the country boomed since last year. In the first 10 months from January to October, we had an increase of 160% of the same period in 2020 and a recovery of 70% from 2019 pre-pandemic levels. In the country, between the periods of July and October, we're talking about over 1.6 million visitors in the country, and that is an increase from last year and close to 75%, in 2019. Greece's tourism industry is almost 1.3 of the total GDP of the country, so you can understand how these numbers really correspond to the growth of the economic growth of the country and how serious this industry is for Greece. And the numbers not only show that it's been good this year, but also the Minister of Tourism, Mr. Vasilis Kikilias, said that the bookings that happened this year for the summer of 2022 have increased 30% of pre-pandemic levels, with a positive outlook perhaps of over 7%.
And Evangelo, tell us more about this economic summit in Athens. What's been discussed so far?
Well, the summit started today and will be going on through Wednesday, so from the 6th into the 8th. Today, so far, the two main speakers was the Mr. Margaritis Chinas, the Vice Minister of the European Commission, and the U.S. Deputy Secretary of Commerce, Don Graves. The main discussion here, the main point that they both made during their both key speeches was about coming out of the pandemic strong, recovering, but changing the economy. So decarbonization, green energy, focusing mostly on the digitalization of the country, moving and shifting from carbon, fossil fuels to green energy, renewable energy, but focusing mostly on foreign investments. They both made statements that the country really needs to be more focusing more on private companies investing in the country, that those companies need to be even more aggressive when it comes to investments, and that if indeed companies will be coming in to invest into the EU and specifically in Greece, then the European Union will help Greece with grants and funds to get more of that investment and the switch from fossil fuels to green energy. There's a lot of keynotes. They spoke a lot about the EU, about recovering of the economy of the whole of the EU, with, of course, focusing on Greece, the relationship between the EU and Greece and how that has changed in the last few years, investments from overseas, but also a really key important note here that a lot of times when they're mentioning about economic growth and economic miracle, they're all referring to China and how China was able to to turn that from the 80s until today, becoming one of the strongest economic powers in the world. Tomorrow, there will be more people speaking during the summit. Tomorrow, the event, Tsipras, the leader of the opposition, will give a speech, as well as the U.S. Ambassador here in Greece, Mr. Payet, will speak about green energy, the switch of green energy, the difficulties, the issues, and also the finances and how they're going to finance a green energy in the country.
Lots to talk about. Evangelos Tsipras in Athens. Thanks so much.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Indonesia's Mount Semeru continues to smoulder, hampering efforts to reach survivors of Saturday's dramatic eruption.
It's the first day in Germany that vaccination centers like this one are offering a third jab.
There are fears there could be a fifth wave of COVID-19 cases.
Market watchers have a keen eye on infection rates,
safety and efficacy of COVID-19 shots. France closed schools in the first lockdown in spring last year. France has been a leader in vaccinating youngsters.
If a spike necessitates another lockdown,
Italy is now close to reaching its target of immunising 80% of the population over the age of 12.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories: Nigeria criticises the UK for putting it on the travel red list, branding the move travel apartheid as countries tighten coronavirus entry restrictions.
Protests over prices in Belgium. Thousands take to the streets, angry at stagnant wages and rising inflation.
And China's leaders put stability over speed as they chart a course for the country's economic future.
In Germany, the Green Party has just approved a coalition agreement, the last of the three parties to endorse the so-called traffic light government. It paves the way for an historic first. Europe's largest economy has never seen a three-party coalition before. It's also officially signals Germany entering political life without Chancellor Angela Merkel at the helm. Let's talk now to our correspondent Trent Murray in Berlin. So, Trent, bring us up to speed with what's happened today.
Well, Paul, we really are getting very, very close now to there officially being a change of government in Berlin with this announcement this afternoon from the Green Party. What they essentially said was that after holding a ballot of party members, there was a resounding vote for yes for them entering into this coalition with the other two parties involved. One being the SPD, Olaf Scholz party, the biggest one involved in all of this, and then also the smaller pro-business, small government party, the FDP. When you put all three of them together, you then reach a majority on the floor of Parliament, and with them now agreeing to work together, that does usher in now the inevitability of Olaf Scholz being inaugurated as the next Chancellor of Germany, replacing Angela Merkel. We expect that to happen on Wednesday, when Olaf Scholz officially will take over as Chancellor. A few final details being ironed out amongst which ministries go to whom and which policies will be a priority. But it really does seem now that we are reaching the finish line after these months of intense negotiations between all sides. We finally do have an agreement, and that agreement will be put into practice in less than 48 hours.
A very full in-tray for this new coalition government, Trent. What are the priorities?
Yeah, there'll be very little time for Olaf Scholz to settle into this role. He has got a lot that he needs to deal with. First and foremost is the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, Germany seeing extraordinarily high cases when compared to the rest of the pandemic. And so the priority now is getting on top of that. As part of that approach, there is a very contentious debate starting to build here in Germany over the possibility of a mandatory vaccination order being issued. Already, Mr. Scholz has signalled that that is something that he may look at. And I think emboldening that approach was his announcement today that Karl Lauterbach will become the next health minister. Now, that name may not be too well known outside of Germany, but what I can tell you is it is very well known here, because he is an epidemiologist who has been one of the strongest voices calling for things like lockdowns and vaccine mandates throughout this entire pandemic. With him now becoming the health minister, we could be about to see quite a major shift in the way Germany does deal with the remaining unvaccinated people here. We'll have to wait and see, of course, but it seems that Olaf Scholz really is putting together a government which will mark a big shift away from the years of Angela Merkel.
OK, thanks for that, Trent. Trent Murray in Berlin.
Austria's former Interior Minister Karl Nehammer has been sworn in as Chancellor, the country's third in as many months. He had already been chosen as the head of the ruling People's Party after the sudden resignation of leader Sebastian Kurz amid continuing corruption allegations. Kurz's replacement, Alexander Schallenberg, also resigned last week, saying he thought the country should be run by the head of the ruling party.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has arrived in Delhi for the 21st annual India-Russia summit. Putin was greeted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, who said relations between the two countries have strengthened despite COVID and other challenges. Putin is seeking to bolster military and energy ties with a traditional ally that is being courted by Washington. It's Putin's second overseas trip since the pandemic.
The Prime Minister of the Solomon Islands has survived a vote of no confidence after weeks of anti-government riots that left 4 people dead and dozens of buildings destroyed. The protests were reportedly sparked by a decision to establish relations with China and end diplomatic ties with Taipei, opening up the country to Chinese investment. China has condemned the violence that took place during the protests.
Gambia's president has won a second term in office. Adama Barrow was re-elected with around 53% of the vote following Saturday's election. As his supporters celebrated, the former property developer called for unity. However, opposition candidates have rejected the results, questioning their validity.
The United Arab Emirates' top security advisor is making a rare visit to Iran. Sheikh Tahnoun bin Zayed Al Nahyan is holding high-level talks with Iranian officials. The two countries have been at loggerheads over issues such as the war in Yemen and attacks on Saudi oil facilities. Tehran has indicated it wants to reset ties with the UAE since the imposition of American sanctions.
China's Zhao Xintong has won the UK Snooker Championship, beating Belgium's Luca Brockel 10 frames to 5. It's the first ranking title for the 24-year-old and means he's jumped from 26th to 10th in the world rankings. Chinese players now hold 2 of the 3 Triple Crown titles after Yan Bingtao's triumph at the Masters in January.
The former leader of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, has had a 4-year prison term halved after receiving a partial pardon from the military government on the same day as her sentence. She was found guilty of charges of incitement and breaking COVID restrictions in the closed court hearings. The verdict is the first in a series of sentences that could see the Nobel laureate imprisoned for decades. Suu Kyi has been held in detention since a military takeover ousted her government in February. CGTN's Martin Lowe reports.
So the NLD, which is the National League for Democracy and which is Ms Suu Kyi's political party, is trying to champion democracy in a country that hasn't historically had it. Now, the military held total control in Myanmar for around 6 decades. Then at the beginning of the last decade, there was a relaxation, a liberalisation. Elections were held and a democratic government took over. At further elections, the NLD won again, and then last year they won by a landslide. Now, that was enough, it seems, for some people in the military who claimed that those elections had been rigged and it was time for the army to step in. They mounted a takeover of Myanmar in a military coup in February of this year. Now, some suggest that the present-day army generals thought that those who'd allowed elections to take place earlier had been too liberal and it was time to take back control. Now, Ms Suu Kyi remains the most popular figure in Myanmar politics and is seen as a potent force in the country's administration.
Martin Lowe there. Indonesia's Semeru volcano has been spewing more ash, halting the search for survivors after Saturday's dramatic eruption. At least 14 people are known to have died, while 35 are seriously injured.
More than 1,000 people have now been moved to safety. Sulkina Alawalia reports from Jakarta.
Authorities are working around the clock to search for any survivors that might still be buried under deep layers of ash. The Indonesian military is currently working to send their heavy-duty equipment to these villages because rescue teams are digging through the mud with their bare hands and any minimal equipment they can find around the area. And of course, we know that this is not conducive because vehicles and houses are buried there as tall as rooftops. Aside from that, the area is still thick with smoke. The weather has also been very unsupportive with heavy rainstorms, and that is affecting power in those areas. Thousands of people have been evacuated out of their homes, and authorities are urging the public to stay away at least 5 kilometers from the crater because activities such as hot ash and pyroclastic flow could be expected in the coming days, and it could reach as high as 1,000 degrees Celsius.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Dressed to thrill. Comic-Con is back for the first time since the start of the pandemic. We find out why participants say it's now more important than ever.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. US lawmakers have failed to come up with a consensus on gun control after another school shooting.
Yes, Republican senators blocked a Democrat bill which would increase background checks on those trying to buy guns. Nick Harper reports.
US Congressman Thomas Massey's photo on Twitter shows him and his family holding an assortment of weapons, with the message, "Merry Christmas, P.S. Santa, please bring ammo." The photos prompted online support from pro-gun users, but also condemnation. The backlash follows the deadliest US school shooting in more than 3.5 years. 15-year-old Ethan Crumley is accused of fatally shooting 4 students and injuring 7 others at Oxford High School in Michigan. His parents also face charges of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutors say they bought the gun for their son and ignored warning signs that he was a threat.
Not guilty.
They appeared in court on Saturday by video conference, pleading not guilty to the charges. Passing new laws through a divided Congress is a perennial problem for gun control advocates. Many Republicans stand against reform. Just this week, following the shooting in Michigan, a Republican senator blocked a bill aimed at strengthening background checks for anyone seeking to buy a firearm. The Democrat who proposed the law says even small changes could help.
I won't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? I want universal background checks. I want a ban on assault weapons, but I will settle for something much less because that will save lives. Listen, I wish my Republican colleagues didn't sort of have epiphanies on this issue only after mass school shootings, but that tends to be what happens. And so my hope is that in the next couple of weeks we can get back to the table.
President Joe Biden, a supporter of expanded control measures, has called American gun violence an epidemic. But Congress is unable to find consensus, meaning yet another school tragedy has come and gone, with no changes to laws governing firearms in America likely to follow. Nick Harper, CGTN, Washington.
Los Angeles Comic-Con is back after COVID forced its cancellation last year. The convention brings together creators and fans of some of the most popular comic books and animation series.
Masks and proof of vaccination are required for the visitors. Adis Tiansan reports.
Looking for a comic book or a new samurai sword? Or maybe you just want to dress up as your favorite fictional character. Comic-Con has it all.
I would say Comic-Con is the special place for it. I'm just actually new into cosplaying, so I haven't really had the opportunity to do it elsewhere outside of here.
It's considered a safe space for everyone to express their passion and share it with others, and the creativity comes in all shapes and forms.
It attracts such a wide demographic of makers and fans, gives them a really big platform to mingle. And it's not just superhero oriented, it's for creative types of all kinds. It gives them an outlet to bring what they're doing personally to the world in an interactable way, especially right now when people tend to be more closed in. It's such a necessity, and we've lost it for so long. So I think it's really integral at this point.
Artists of all kinds are drawn to this convention for the inspiration it offers.
Comic-Con is back in Los Angeles for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic, and it means a lot to thousands of people who normally come here every year. And not just for the comic books, they are also here to cosplay. They're looking for their favorite collectibles or merchandise, or some are simply here trying to meet their favorite creators.
You're only aiming to be their best.
Live events include stand-up shows, autograph signings, and panels with industry leaders.
It's okay to not be perfect and not be so precious about the work in the beginning, because we all started there. Don't let it be like, so much pressure on you, but it's like there's creativity in all of us, and so let it fly.
Many have brought along their passion projects to gain more exposure. Mike White has built RAS in his garage from scratch and is looking to start a business.
I'm passing out business cards. I'm trying to get open up opportunity, get jobs off of that. I'm actually starting something new where you actually have like a robot where you take around for parties, events. It could be corporate events. whatever it is. If you want a robot there to entertain, sing, dance, and that's what he does. He sings, he dances.
Can you show us some moves?
We all need a little fun these days, with the coronavirus threat still far from gone, and Comic-Con's return offers some relief for artists and fans alike. It is Tianshan, CGTN, Los Angeles.
Snow sports continue to grow in popularity in China as Beijing prepares to host the Winter Olympics.
As many take their first steps onto ice rinks and ski slopes, some are already veterans, even at a young age. Yo Yang reports.
Ice sports are popular here in Shenyang. Fan Zixuan is one of the amateurs, and he's already been figure skating for 6 years.
I'm 11. My mother took me to the ice rink and I fell in love with figure skating. I fell and hurt my face the last time, but I still love this sport and really want to keep practicing it.
Fan has become a little star on this rink, but all these dazzling techniques come from hard work and perseverance.
Fan started to learn figure skating when he was in kindergarten. He's won gold medals in several national competitions, such as the National Club Figure Skating League contest and the U-Series National Teenagers Figure Skating competition. He really is a very talented skater.
Jiang Anjingyi is one of the girls playing ice hockey, and this 10-year-old has already been in several international competitions.
I like ice hockey. It's very exciting. My team and I have competed with teenagers from Russia. They were very strong. It was an unforgettable experience for me.
I used to be an ice hockey player. I think my daughter has inherited the gift from me, so she plays really well. In the Northeast, most parents like taking their kids to the ice rink.
China has been on a mission to get more people, around 300 million, into winter sports. A 2020 survey by the German university suggests that around half that number participated in some form of ice and snow sport during the winter season. And Chinese authorities say they expect that numbers to keep growing, especially among teenagers. Yu Yang, CGTN in Shenyang, Liaoning Province.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube, Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Up next on CGTN is Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place, from all the team in London. Goodbye.
Goodbye.